Hello, everyone. Tonight, we begin. The ballroom was warm, almost too warm, like the kind of heat that rises not from temperature, but from too many unspoken things hanging in the air. The scent of polished wood and overripe lilies clung to the air, thick as syrup. Somewhere near the stage, someone was laughing, too loudly, nervously. And above it all, in letters glowing golden against a velvet backdrop, my name, Helena Vaughn, Strategic Excellence Award. The applause hadn't even faded yet. My name still floated on the screen, impossibly bright, like a beacon or maybe a warning. And then, like a magician revealing a final trick, Greg Holloway stepped onto the stage. The smile on his face was practiced, plastic, and just a little too tight. You could smell the cologne of betrayal if you stood close enough. "Let's give one final round of applause," he said, raising his glass, to Helena Vaughn, the architect behind 3 of the most historic partnerships in Wexley Global's history. The crowd stood. I stood. My fingers were wrapped around the cold base of the Crystal Award. It had weight, real weight, etched with my name deep and permanent, just like I thought my place at Wexley had been. Greg glanced at me, then back at the audience, and then he said it. And tonight, we not only celebrate Helena, we also say farewell. Have you ever felt the floor slide out from under you, even though your heels are still planted? Laughter rippled around the room in confused waves. Some people clapped. Others looked around, unsure if this was part of the program. I didn't move. I couldn't. Effective immediately, Greg continued, not blinking, Helena will be stepping away from Wexley Global as part of our leadership realignment. That's when it happened. Not with a shout, not with a bang, but with the quiet violence of something premeditated. The screen behind me shifted. My name vanished. A video began. Soft piano music, montage clips of company milestones. And then, her face, Catherine Lee, a woman I had mentored for years, eager, polite, painfully unqualified. She smiled through the video as though she had been born for this. Meet our new head of strategic partnerships. I stood there, still holding the award, my hand now numb. I could feel the skin on my face freeze into a smile. The kind of smile you make when cameras are still rolling and everyone is watching for your reaction. I was being erased, neatly, elegantly, applauded into non-existence. And here's a strange fact. Champagne tastes sharper when it's laced with humiliation. Greg raised his glass again. "Here's to bold transitions," he said, and then walked off the stage. No apology, no explanation, just a glass of wine in one hand and a knife to the throat. They say betrayal feels like a knife in your back. No, this was different. This was betrayal poured into a crystal glass, served under a spotlight, and delivered with a standing ovation. And the worst part? No one stopped the music. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the award, or storm out, or scream, even though every cell in my body burned for it. Instead, I smiled. Because here's the uncomfortable truth I want you to remember tonight. Applause doesn't always mean respect. Sometimes it means they're just glad you're finally gone. So before you get too comfortable, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always like to know who's watching and when. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on a little fan for background noise, and let's begin tonight's story together. I didn't sleep that night. Not even a little. There's something about public humiliation that sticks to the skin long after the spotlight fades. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the award still in its velvet box beside me, untouched. The weight of it now felt obscene, like keeping a souvenir from your own funeral. You might think I was devastated. I wasn't, not then. What I felt was something colder, sharper, like the kind of cold that doesn't come from outside, but starts deep in your chest and spreads slowly, methodically, until it hardens you. Not grief, not sadness, just questions. Cold, calculated questions. Why now? Why like that? And more importantly, how long had they been planning it? I didn't have to guess. I had my answer before sunrise. At 3:17 a.m., I opened my phone out of habit. Muscle memory, really. No new emails. Of course not. My company account had been deactivated. But there was one notification. Not from Wexley, from the security app tied to my internal access. A strange ping, an alert I had never seen before. Subject: System Deactivation Notification. Timestamp: 2 days ago. 2 days ago. Before the ballroom, before the speech, before the fake tribute video. They had already wiped me out. If I had tried to log in before that stage moment, I would have found myself locked out while still smiling for the cameras. That's the part that got me. Not the betrayal, not even the replacement. The choreography. Because this wasn't clumsy. This wasn't spur of the moment. This had been orchestrated down to the second. A seamless little opera of dismissal, delivered with lighting cues and flute music. That's when I knew. Greg didn't just want me gone. He wanted me forgotten. He wanted a stage, a performance, a little act of misdirection. The audience cheers, the video plays, and while you're still clapping, poof, I vanish. Not fired, not demoted, just removed. And maybe here's where I should tell you about Greg Holloway. He came in 6 months ago. Young, trim, fresh off some buzzword-heavy leadership evolution tour from a tech firm that flamed out in 9 months. Wexley's board brought him in to modernize culture, whatever that means. From day one, he watched me like a hawk, said all the right things in meetings, but behind the scenes, he pulled me from briefings I used to lead, cut me out of strategy sessions I'd created, started referring to accounts by numbers instead of names. It wasn't immediate, that would have been too obvious. It was a slow drip, the kind of erosion you only notice when you're already knee-deep in mud and wondering when your shoes disappeared. They called it realignment. I called it erasure. Still, I delivered. I closed Halbert, then North Star, and then, by some miracle, a Dare Trust, the most elusive whale in our industry. I brought in over $480 million in new partnerships in under 1 quarter. Greg smiled through every press interview, like he had done it himself. But that smile made sense now. It wasn't gratitude. It was the smirk of a man who thought he had played the game better than you. But here's the thing Greg didn't know. He wasn't the only one playing. You want a fun fact? There's a clause buried in most high-level corporate deals that allows the client to walk if the key negotiator is removed without cause. Most companies ignore it, think it's symbolic. I didn't. When we were finalizing Halbert, I slipped it in, quietly, cleanly, a single sentence, no spotlight. In the event that Helena Vaughn is removed from her liaison role without formal cause, the client reserves the right to exit the agreement without penalty. I did the same with North Star and with Adair, not for revenge, not for drama, for ethics, for insurance, for control. None of them blinked. You think it's paranoia? It's not. It's foresight. So when Greg cut me out of the company, what he didn't know was that he also cut out the floor beneath his own feet. The dominoes hadn't fallen yet, but they would, because real power doesn't live in press releases. It lives in footnotes, in clauses, in well-timed contingencies. And that's the moment, sitting on that bed, eyes dry, hands steady, that I felt it. Not sadness, not anger, but readiness. I didn't rush. That's important. When systems fall apart, everyone expects you to crumble too. They watch you, waiting for the outburst, the tear-streaked breakdown, the desperate attempt to claw your way back into the room you were just kicked out of. But I didn't scream. I didn't even send a reply. I made tea. There's something beautifully subversive about doing something ordinary in the middle of a crisis. While Greg was probably celebrating with Catherine and the board was polishing their speeches about bold transitions, I steeped jasmine leaves in silence and logged into a private cloud account, the one Greg didn't know existed. And there it was, my insurance. A digital garden I'd been tending for months. Sparse at first, just some contracts, drafts, and structural documents. But now it was ready to bloom. Nova True Partners, legal name registered, EIN confirmed, domain purchased, brand identity built by a freelance designer in Austin I'd once helped land a job. Even the client onboarding portal was already coded and tested. You see, I knew Greg would come for me eventually. The signs were all there. The reshuffled decks, the passive-aggressive feedback loops, the exclusion from leadership briefings. But I wasn't going to beg to stay. I was going to build something better to leave for. Nova True wasn't revenge. It was architecture, designed for precision, for survival. The name wasn't random either. No, North Star. Va, Violin Core, Halbert's parent company. True, Adair Trust. 3 clients, 3 deals, 3 anchors. The only ones who had truly seen me, not just as a negotiator, but as a person. When I told my lawyer the name, she paused. Loyalty written in code, she said. Exactly. Back in that hotel room, I clicked on the final tab. Go live. And just like that, Nova True Partners stopped being a backup plan. It became the main story. And now I waited. Because those little clauses I'd buried months ago weren't just pretty words. They were triggers. Invisible lines written in plain sight. The moment Wexley removed my name from their systems, without cause, those contracts began to unravel. Quietly, elegantly, like a fuse you forgot you lit. I wasn't even mad, just focused. In fact, I took a walk. Yes, a literal walk, through the pre-dawn quiet of Midtown, wrapped in a coat that still smelled faintly of cedar from my office. No destination, just motion. My mind was already 3 steps ahead, writing scenarios, calculating probabilities. That's when the phone rang, 4:30 a.m. I didn't recognize the number, but my gut did. I answered on the first ring. Helena, said the voice, low, deliberate, wide awake. I assume you're no longer at Wexley. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. Eleanor Green, chairwoman of Adair Trust, was not a woman who asked questions she didn't already know the answers to. We've been watching, she continued. We read the contracts. We saw the shifting tone. Frankly, we expected them to hold on to you longer, but arrogance makes men sloppy. There was no sympathy in her voice, no regret, just clarity. And then, with a pause so deliberate it felt ceremonial, she asked, "Are you ready to lead?" My breath caught, not from fear, from alignment. This was the moment every late night, every small decision, every contingency had been built for. I looked around me, the empty street, the glow of the city, the silence inside. Yes, I said, no hesitation, no qualifiers. Just a word. The one I had waited 6 months to say without needing permission. She didn't congratulate me, didn't welcome me, just said, "You'll hear from our chief of strategy before 8. We want to be your first client and your anchor." Then she hung up. I stood there a moment longer, the hum of the city returning slowly around me. The streets weren't applauding. There was no music, no ceremony, just a quiet victory in the form of a 4:30 a.m. phone call. And that's how you know it's real, not by who celebrates you, but by who follows you into the dark without needing a spotlight. By 10 a.m., Wexley still hadn't said a word. No email, no press release, no explanation. They were hoping silence would smother the fallout, that people would forget, that no one would notice a name disappearing mid-celebration. But silence is funny that way. Sometimes it hides shame. Other times, it amplifies it. At 2 p.m., the first domino fell. I was having lunch, lemon salmon, window seat, Midtown cafe I'd frequented during client offsites. My fork was halfway to my mouth when my phone buzzed. Once, then again. then a third time in rapid succession, followed by one long hum, the kind that only ever means something's happening. I flipped the phone over. 3 messages. One from Wexley's internal email thread, one from an old colleague I hadn't spoken to in months, and one from Marjorie Lane. Subject line: Clause C12 action executed. I didn't open it immediately. I took a sip of water, let the moment breathe. I already knew what it said. At 2 p.m. sharp, Halbert Energy's legal team sent a termination notice, not to Greg, to the board, to Robert Fields himself, the kind of direct escalation that turns stomachs and flips tables. The reason? Violation of Clause C12, key personnel removal without cause. Translation: you cut Helena, we cut the deal. $122 million gone. Just like that. You know what the funny part is? I didn't even have to lift a finger. I'd written the script months ago. Now the play was simply performing itself. Across the city, I could already imagine the chaos blooming. Greg pacing, legal scrambling, PR composing emails with phrases like temporary turbulence and client transition miscommunication. They had no idea what hit them. Because when you don't understand the weapon, you assume it came out of nowhere. But this wasn't sabotage. This wasn't revenge. It was architecture. A structure collapsing not from fire, but from the quiet removal of its cornerstone. And this was just Act 1. As I paid the check and folded my napkin, another message came in. This one different. A courier had dropped off a package for me at my new co-working space. I hadn't even finished unpacking boxes there yet. Still smelled of fresh drywall and startup optimism. I arrived 20 minutes later. The receptionist handed me a thick cream-colored envelope, embossed, handwritten name in the center. Inside, a letter. North Star Logistics. To Helena Vaughn, CEO, Nova True Partners. The content was short. No legal jargon, no red lines. North Star Logistics requests continuation of contract under original strategic leadership, now operating under Nova True Partners. That was it. No back and forth, no formality. Just trust. Quiet, simple, absolute. But there was more. A small velvet box tucked underneath. I opened it slowly. Inside, a watch. A brushed gold timepiece I had gifted Raymond Cho, North Star CEO, after we closed the deal months ago. I remembered the dinner, the private thank you, the engraved message, for time well invested. Now, a new engraving had been added beneath the clasp. You gave us time, now we return it. That's when I sat down, not out of shock, not out of sentiment, but because the weight of it, of being seen, not just noticed, was suddenly too real to carry standing up. See, what people don't understand is that betrayal isn't the loud part. It's the quiet that follows it. The moments where you wonder if you were ever valued at all, if everything you gave was just inventory for someone else's shelf. But then something like this happens, something quiet, gentle, firm, and you remember. The right people don't clap when you're on stage. They stand with you when you've been shoved off it. That afternoon, I didn't speak to anyone. I turned off my notifications, made another cup of tea, and opened a clean notebook. I had a new company, 2 major clients, and a fuse still burning at Wexley HQ. Let them scramble. Let Greg call emergency meetings. I didn't need to say a word. Sometimes, silence is the loudest answer. Greg Holloway sent the email at exactly 6:30 a.m. I was already awake, barefoot in my new kitchen, watching steam curl from a black ceramic mug. There's something meditative about the quiet before the city wakes up, when the world hasn't quite decided what it's going to be yet. Peaceful, clean. Then came the ping. Subject, private and confidential, a way forward. I didn't open it at first. I just stared at the subject line, letting it sit. The way you stare at a mirror right before you decide whether to keep the lie going another day. I sipped my tea, exhaled, then clicked. The message was long, longer than Greg usually wrote. It began with what he thought was humility. Helena, I've had time to reflect on recent events. I want to begin with a sincere acknowledgement. The transition could have been handled better. Could have been. That's how people like him avoid saying, I was wrong. He continued, Wexley Global is facing critical inflection points. Your influence with our former partners is undeniable. We would like to offer you a path back. And then came the offer. A seat on the executive leadership team, direct line to the board, not through him. Equity, voting privileges, reinstatement of my full client portfolio. A peace treaty, dressed in velvet. But make no mistake, it was panic. I knew exactly what had happened. He'd seen Halbert pull out. He'd watched North Star follow. And in that moment, he realized he hadn't just cut a rival. He'd cut the spine of every deal he was trying to sit on. So now he wanted me back, to fix the bleeding, to mop up his mess, to be his firewall and his cleanup crew, wrapped up in a high-level title with just enough flattery to taste like an apology. But it wasn't one. It was a bribe. And here's the problem with trying to buy back what you threw away. Sometimes the silence left in your absence speaks louder than any offer. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and set an auto-response. This account no longer exists. That was it. No drama, no clever quote, just digital emptiness. Because you don't owe explanations to people who tried to erase you. And silence can be the most perfect no in the world. Across the city, Greg was probably refreshing his inbox, pacing, wondering if the message had landed in spam, forwarding it to his assistant, asking if I saw it, trying to convince the board he was in talks. But there were no talks, just an archived email and a quiet sip of tea. Talia, my operations lead, passed by the office doorway a few minutes later, carrying 2 coffees. She paused when she saw the look on my face. You okay? She asked, squinting. I turned the screen toward her. She blinked. Is that who I think it is? I nodded. She let out a low whistle. That man has some nerve. She handed me the second coffee and walked off without another word. No lecture, no pity, just mutual understanding. Because Talia, she'd been watching the game unfold from the moment we flipped Nova True live. And she knew. Greg didn't want reconciliation. He wanted rescue. But what he forgot, what they always forget, is that some of us aren't building careers. We're building legacies. And a legacy isn't something you can beg back into your boardroom. Later that morning, I walked past our small team in the loft. The space was still bare in places. Unfinished floors, wires taped down, whiteboards filled with too many ideas and too little structure. But there was energy, that kind of thick-in-the-air energy that only happens when everyone in the room believes we're building something that matters. Not perfect, but honest. Not polished, but real. I didn't need to wear a blazer, didn't need to pretend I was still fighting to belong in a room that had already locked the door behind me. I had my own keys now. That email from Greg, it didn't sting, it didn't vindicate, it simply confirmed what I had already known. They hadn't fired me, they'd freed me. By Thursday morning, Wexley was starting to crack. Not with headlines, not with lawsuits, but with something much more dangerous in corporate culture: silence. Investor calls went unanswered. Internal Slack channels suddenly grew still. One of the junior partners posted a vague status update about change being the only constant and was promptly told to take it down. You can smell fear through the wires when it starts, but I didn't need insider reports. I didn't need to stalk LinkedIn job changes or spy on social media likes. I had something better. Maya Hensley, senior correspondent, East Coast Business Review, hard-nosed, sharp-witted, a reputation for stories that didn't just trend, they changed boardrooms. I hadn't spoken to Maya in years, not since a leadership panel in DC where she cornered a pharmaceutical CEO into admitting his company had no women in strategic roles. Her text came at 9:03 a.m. Check the front page, print and digital. We followed the breadcrumbs. You should see it before Greg does. I clicked the link. The Quiet Architect. How Helena Vaughn built NovaTrue while still at Wexry and why it was legal all along. My first reaction wasn't pride, it was stillness. Not the kind that comes from shock, the kind that comes from confirmation. Maya had done the work, deep work. She hadn't just interviewed people, she'd mapped the timeline. The company registration 6 months before my dismissal, the freelance contractors, the late-night documents, the quiet clauses, the personal laptop, the weekends in co-working spaces, the legal consultations, each time-stamped, each logged, each separate from my Wexley duties. Not a single line of code had been written on their time. Not a single document had been stored on their servers. Not a single promise had been made to any client before the clauses had been triggered. It was all legal, clean, and devastating. Then came the sentence that would rewrite the story entirely. She didn't break the system. She simply outgrew it. 10 words, 10 carefully chosen, journalist-honed razor-blade words. I scrolled down, slowly, not to skim, to feel it. Quotes from unnamed executives who had quietly watched me get sidelined. Snippets from industry leaders who saw my exit as a shock, but not surprising. A single comment from a legal analyst that read, "It's rare to see someone plan a transition with this level of foresight. This wasn't a coup. This was succession, just not the kind Wexley expected." I looked around my office. Talia had just walked in, tablet in hand. Her eyes were wide. "Have you seen it?" she asked, flipping the screen toward me like it was a bomb she hadn't defused. I nodded, once, calm. She blinked. "You look peaceful." "I am," I said, and I meant it. Because that article, it wasn't noise. It was quiet thunder, the kind that travels slow but strikes hard. Marcus, our investor relations lead, poked his head in behind her. "The advisory inbox just doubled in 15 minutes, he said, and Adair wants permission to quote the article in their next investor letter." A pause. "Do we respond?" I shook my head. No comment, no tweet, no post. Let the article speak for itself. Because here's the trick. People expect you to scream when you win. They expect declarations, hashtags, confetti made of revenge. But the most elegant victories, they whisper. And in that moment, the industry heard mine, clear as a bell. By Friday, the cracks in Wexley had become fault lines. You didn't need a leak to know what was happening. You could see it in the body language of their people, the way they stopped posting, stopped smiling, stopped pretending. The Whisper Network was now in full swing. They're bleeding clients. Greg hasn't been seen on the top floor in 3 days. 2 of the board members flew in early, privately. And beneath all that buzz, beneath the shifting eyes and tightening shoulders, was a quiet, undeniable truth. Greg Holloway was losing control. But I wasn't watching Wexley implode out of schadenfreude. I didn't refresh every hour or pour champagne over every dropped stock point. I had work to do. NovaTrue wasn't a hobby anymore. It was a company, a breathing thing, and it was growing faster than we expected. By 8 a.m., we'd signed 2 new clients. Not legacy hand-me-downs, but fresh leads, startups, mid-cap firms, a clean energy group from Denmark who'd read the article and sent one line. "We're ready to move with people who actually know how to lead." That kind of clarity, you can't buy it. You earn it, one silence at a time. And then, at 9:15 a.m., the final sign arrived. Not a press release, not a lawsuit, just a sentence buried in a public disclosure. The board of directors has convened an executive session regarding urgent leadership matters. No names, no dates. But I didn't need the memo. They were talking about Greg. Finally. I pictured it. A dim conference room, 10 people, all tired, all angry. A table full of spreadsheets and regret. Phones vibrating with media alerts they didn't know how to spin. And at the center of it all, Greg, jaw tight, hands folded, trying to act unfazed. It wasn't rage that did him in. It was strategy, silence, the meticulous removal of his illusions. And then, at 11:52 p.m., nearly midnight, the news broke. Not in headlines, not in a blog, not even through a tip. Through a leak. A confidential internal memo, leaked to Reuters. Subject line: Emergency Board Vote, Executive Termination Agenda, Gregory Holloway. 7 votes to remove, 3 abstained, none defended him. Greg didn't speak during the call, didn't argue, didn't cry. He just signed the document and logged off. No farewell, no transition letter, no fake inspirational LinkedIn post about embracing new opportunities. By morning, his name was removed from Wexley's executive page, replaced with 2 words: interim assigned. But that wasn't the satisfying part. No, the real satisfaction came from who replaced him. David Lang. The same David I had introduced to Wexley's board a year ago. The quiet one, the ethics first consultant Greg said was too academic. Now he was sitting in Greg's chair. Talia walked into the office that morning with her usual oversized coffee and an expression halfway between amusement and awe. "Check the news yet?" she asked. I nodded. He's gone. She let out a slow breath. Just like that. I smiled, but not with victory, with peace. Poetic, she said. Because it was. Not because I'd forced it. Not because I'd campaigned. But because I'd simply let the truth echo, loud enough for the board to finally hear it. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post. Some victories aren't meant to be shouted. They're meant to be felt. Later that day, an email arrived. From David. Subject: Thank you, Helena. It read, "This isn't a formal message, just a personal one. I remember the day you recommended me. I also remember how quickly I was dismissed by those who couldn't see past their own reflections. I never forgot it. Neither did the board. If you're open to it, I'd like to schedule time to talk. Not for Wexley's sake, for the industry's. I believe what you're building matters more than ever." I stared at the screen, not because I wanted something, but because the arc had closed itself. The man Greg tried to silence was now the one cleaning up his silence. And me? I wasn't returning. I was building something better, from scratch, from scars, from stillness. The room was still when I stepped onto the stage. Not silent, still. There's a difference. Silence can feel cold, indifferent. Stillness, it hums. It's the breath before thunder, the hush before the first note. It had been 6 months since Wexley removed my name from their lobby wall. Tonight, it was printed across the invitation cards in bold serif font. Nova True Partners, official public launch. We didn't rent a hotel ballroom or light up a skyscraper. We chose a restored warehouse in Soho. Brick walls, polished wood floors, amber lighting. Nothing corporate, nothing sterile. Just clarity. The guest list wasn't enormous. No influencers, no filler. Just people who mattered. Industry veterans, clients, former colleagues, a few rivals, many skeptics. But every single one of them was here. Not because they were loyal, but because they were watching. And I knew exactly what they were watching for. Will she flinch? Will she fall apart? Will she make it about revenge? I didn't. I stepped up to the podium. No teleprompter, no printed speech. Just the truth I'd carried in silence for too long. "My name is Helena Vaughn," I began, "and I want to start by telling you what this isn't." A pause. Let it sink in. This is not a rebuke, not retaliation,
not a war disguised as innovation. Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, others leaned forward. NovaTrue wasn't born out of anger, it was born out of necessity. I watched their faces. Some nodded, some blinked slowly, the way you do when truth stings more than fiction. I kept going. We're not here to disrupt. That word is tired. We're here to restore, to bring back what strategy used to mean, what trust used to feel like. And then I said the only line I knew would leave a mark. We don't compete, we correct. That's when the curtain behind me parted. 3 figures walked out in silence. No announcement, no music, no need. Marjorie Lane, Raymond Cho, Eleanor Green. They didn't wave, didn't bow. They simply stood behind me, shoulder to shoulder. The room didn't explode. It unfolded, not all at once, but in waves. People stood, not out of obligation, out of something else. Recognition, respect, relief. Somewhere near the back, a journalist put her phone down mid-recording. I watched her eyes glisten. She wasn't crying, not really. It was something closer to remembering. Talia stood beside the AV booth, gripping Marcus's arm. They both looked at me the way people look at someone who doesn't just survive the storm, they become it. The final video began to play on the screen behind us. Simple, black background, white serif text. No music, no effects, just one sentence. Sometimes they think they're firing you, but really, they're just freeing you. That was it. No logo, no narration, no dramatic crescendo, just that line. And then the screen faded to black. That was the moment. Not when I stepped on stage, not when the applause came, not even when the 3 clients stood behind me. The moment was that line. Because in that instant, every person in the room remembered something. A moment they were underestimated, a time they were overlooked, a door that closed too loudly. And now they saw a way through it. After the speech, I stayed, shook hands, answered questions, signed a few copies of our first impact report. No one asked about Wexley. They didn't need to. That chapter had already closed itself. Later, as the guests trickled out into the cool Manhattan night, Talia handed me a glass of sparkling water and said softly, "They tried to erase you." I looked down at the NovaTrue emblem etched into the glass. "They didn't," I said, and I meant it, because this wasn't just a comeback. It was a beginning.
The next morning came slowly, like it had something to apologize for. I woke before the alarm, blinking into the soft gray light pouring through the window of my apartment. No headlines had changed, no breaking news banners. The city didn't know what had just happened the night before, but something in the air was different. Not dramatic, not loud, just different. I moved like I was still floating, poured coffee without thinking, fed the dog across the hall because his owner was traveling and I'd promised. And then I opened my inbox. Nothing urgent, no fire, no Greg, just a single subject line sitting there, small and precise. Clause C12, final notice issued, sent from Eleanor Green's legal team. It was real now, official. Adair Trust was terminating all Wexley contracts, effective immediately. No press statements, no PR fluff, no option for re-entry. Just a signature, a seal, and a goodbye. The email wasn't long, no need to drag the knife. It simply cited the original clause, outlined the breach, and confirmed the board's unanimous support for Eleanor's decision. And just like that, Wexley's final leg snapped. If Halbert was the first domino and North Star the echo, then Adair was the anchor, the legacy account, the one they built their global credibility on. The one they bragged about in earnings calls, slid into investor decks, printed across brochures. Gone, because of a single clause they hadn't bothered to read. Greg didn't just cut me, he detonated 3 of the most lucrative partnerships the company had, and all I did was sit still and let the truth arrive on schedule. There's a kind of poetry to that.
letting consequences knock on the door without having to send the invitation. I got dressed slowly. Nothing dramatic, just slacks, a soft blouse, and a gray blazer I hadn't worn in months. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. Not because she'd changed, because for the first time in years, she looked like herself. Before noon, I received a text from Maya. They've gone silent. Not a single executive response since the article dropped. I've never seen a company disquiet and still call itself alive. It was true. Greg hadn't issued a counterstatement. No board member had commented. And every time a journalist requested insight, they were redirected to internal alignment discussions, a phrase that means we're bleeding and don't know where from. That same day, a package arrived at our office. No return address, just my name in elegant silver ink. Inside, a single object, a pen, matte black, weighted perfectly, engraved with 3 words, "For what comes next." No note, but I knew who it was from. Raymond Cho, North Star. He was never one for grand gestures, but he understood symbolism better than most. He was telling me it was time to write new contracts, to make new moves, to lead. I placed the pen on my desk, right next to the original NovaTrue binder, the first draft of what this company had become. Then I closed my laptop, walked out into the street, and just existed. Not in fight mode, not in defense, not in strategy. Just walking, breathing, living. Because sometimes the best response to those who tried to write your ending is to keep writing. On your own terms, with your own pen, and in your own voice.
It started quietly, as most revolutions do. A few missed investor calls, a cryptic memo from Wexley's interim team about ongoing strategic alignment, a canceled webinar that had been advertised for weeks. You wouldn't know something was wrong unless you were watching. And I was, carefully, deliberately, from a distance. By Monday, the markets had taken notice. Wexley's stock dropped 14% before lunch, another 11% by close of business. The financial blogs called it market adjustment, but we knew the truth. It was hemorrhaging, and there was no one left to stitch it up. That night, I stayed late at the office, not because I had to, because I wanted to. There's a certain type of calm that descends when everyone else is gone, the kind where you can hear your own breath and it feels like it belongs to something greater. I walked the rows of our space, still raw, still unfinished. One whiteboard had the word focus written in blue ink and circled 3 times. I stared at it for a moment, then erased the circle. Focus didn't need decoration. At 10:37 p.m., a notification buzzed on my laptop, a forwarded internal memo from someone I didn't know personally, but who had apparently decided silence wasn't worth it anymore. The memo subject line read, "Leadership clarity, executive departures and rebuilding trust." It was long, meandering, the kind of thing committees write together, each trying to soften the other's language until nothing sharp remains. But buried halfway through was the truth. Following the unexpected loss of 3 cornerstone clients and the departure of former CEO Greg Holloway, the board will be engaging third-party consultants to reassess Wexley Global's direction. Unexpected? I smiled, because only someone deeply asleep could call this unexpected. The memo ended with a single line that made me tilt my head. "We thank Mr. Holloway for his service and wish him the best in his next chapter." There it was, the soft corporate eulogy. No applause, no tribute video, just an email no one wanted to read, drafted by a PR team no one trusted. And what came next? Something quieter, but far more powerful. The messages, not from executives, not from competitors, from people. The ones who used to sit in the rows I once led. The ones who watched it all happen from the edge of the room, unsure whether to clap or cover their mouths. Now they were reaching out. I stayed silent, but I saw what they did.
I've never forgotten how you fought for our team. They tried to make you disappear, but you're everywhere now. Is NovaTrue hiring?" It wasn't pity. It wasn't regret. It was recognition. The kind you don't get with press releases. The kind you earn in the margins. I didn't respond to most of them, not because I didn't care, but because I wanted them to sit with what they'd said, to know I heard them, and that hearing was enough. Around midnight, I got one final email. Short, anonymous, but unmistakably sincere. "You changed how I see everything. Not with a speech, not with a fight, but with a choice. Thank you." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. No chandeliers, no gold plaques. Just steel beams, exposed wires, and a future built from quiet fury and precise planning. Somewhere in the city, Wexley was still drafting responses, trying to patch holes in a ship that had already sunk. Me, I just turned out the lights and let the dark feel like freedom.
The headlines came Tuesday morning. Not the tabloid kind, not scandal-driven, not clickbait. These were industry headlines, the ones that matter to people who write the checks and pull the strings. Wexley Global loses 3 key clients amid executive shakeup. Financial insights. Internal restructure or collapse. Analysts debate Wexley's future. The corporate ledger. NovaTrue emerges as new strategic powerhouse. East Coast Business Review. I read them all, slowly, calmly, like someone reading a weather report for a storm she'd already planned for 6 months ago. But I didn't share them, didn't repost, didn't even bring it up with my team. Because we weren't in this for applause. We were here to build. Still, it didn't stop the ripple. By mid-morning, our inbox was a jungle. Startups, legacy firms, nonprofits, mid-tier manufacturers. Everyone asking the same thing. Are you accepting new clients? Can we schedule a conversation? Do you have capacity for a long-term partnership? Talia printed out a few of the more serious ones and pinned them to our project board under the word intentions. She walked into my office holding one she hadn't pinned yet. "Thought you'd want to read this one yourself," she said. It was from someone I hadn't heard from since long before the fall. Ava Brentwood, former CMO at Halbert. Smart, cautious, ruthlessly efficient. The kind of woman who didn't waste adjectives in her emails. "Helena, we're watching. Everyone is. Not just what you're doing, how you're doing it. We've had consultants, we've had visionaries, but we've never had someone make silence feel like strategy. If NovaTrue is expanding its advisory board, I'd like to be considered. Not for the optics, for the alignment. A.B." Talia raised an eyebrow as I finished. I didn't know she was watching. "She watches everything," I said, folding the page in half. We pinned it anyway, not because we needed more advisors, but because sometimes a folded note on a corkboard says more than a mission statement ever could. That afternoon, I went for a walk, alone. The air had cooled. A wind was moving through the avenues like it had some way to be. I let it carry me, past old buildings and new ones, past the places I used to go when I was still Helena from Wexley, not quite sure when my usefulness would expire. And I found myself, almost involuntarily, outside the glass doors of Wexley's main headquarters. The building still stood. Of course it did. Systems don't collapse just because the truth shows up. They stall, they wither, they leak confidence until no one remembers what held it up in the first place. I didn't go inside. I just stood there, watching people walk in and out. New faces, tense shoulders, some fake laughter already tired by noon. Behind the glass, nothing had changed, and yet everything had. That's the thing no one tells you. The room doesn't feel different when you're gone. You do. You feel bigger. Not because you left, because you outgrew it. I stood there for 5 minutes, maybe 10, then turned and walked away, back toward something that felt like breath, back toward my name on a door no one could remove. By the end of the week, we were operating in momentum. That's a dangerous word in corporate environments. People think it means speed, but real momentum, it's focus without friction. Every meeting had purpose. Every new message had clarity. Every client that reached out already understood the rules of engagement. No games, no bloated promises, just strategy that meant something again. It was the kind of rhythm I hadn't felt in years, not since before Greg, not since before boardrooms became battlegrounds. Talia walked into my office holding a legal folder. She was smiling. "You might want to see this one yourself," she said. Inside, a formal contract request. Logo, Virelli Group, a top 5 European logistics firm, the kind of account Wexley had tried and failed to win for over a decade. There was a handwritten note stapled to the top. "We heard Novatru doesn't pitch. That's fine. We're not asking for one. We just want to talk strategy in a room where no one's performing." Underneath, 3 signatures already filled in. I stared at it for a moment, not in disbelief, just acknowledgement, then nodded once. "Get them on the calendar." Talia beamed. "Already did." This was becoming a pattern. No decks, no rehearsals, no marketing fireworks, just credibility, earned quietly, in the background, while everyone else tried to go viral. By noon, Marcus forwarded a spreadsheet of our growth curve. He'd added a note. "I think we need a bigger whiteboard." The numbers were clean, not explosive, but steady, healthy, intentional. And every new partnership came from the same source, referrals. Not from campaigns, not from cold calls, from people who remembered what trust used to look like. At 3 p.m., I got another message, short, curious, no subject line. "They're asking how you did it, how you stayed quiet and still kept all the leverage. They're rewriting their playbooks, but none of them can agree on the chapter title. Jay." I didn't know who Jay was. Didn't matter. They were right. Everyone was asking the same thing. How? But the answer was boring. I hadn't burned anything down. I hadn't hacked the system. I hadn't even shouted. I just waited and wrote the right clauses and honored the right people and didn't flinch when the lights hit me. If you're waiting for a twist, I'm sorry. This isn't a heist. It's a blueprint, the kind you etch slowly, one dotted line at a time. That night, I stayed late again, not because I had to, because I still couldn't quite believe what peace felt like when it didn't come with conditions. I looked out the window. The city glowed like it always does, like it was performing for someone. But I didn't need the spotlight anymore. Just a pen, a plan, and enough quiet to hear my own voice again. By the end of the week, we were operating in momentum. That's a dangerous word in corporate environments. People think it means speed, but real momentum? It's focus without friction. Every meeting had purpose. Every new message had clarity. Every client that reached out already understood the rules of engagement. No games, no bloated promises, just strategy that meant something again. It was the kind of rhythm I hadn't felt in years, not since before Greg, not since before boardrooms became battlegrounds. Talia walked into my office holding a legal folder. She was smiling. "You might want to see this one yourself," she said. Inside, a formal contract request. Logo, Virelli Group, a top 5 European logistics firm, the kind of account Wexley had tried and failed to win for over a decade. There was a handwritten note stapled to the top. "We heard Novatru doesn't pitch. That's fine. We're not asking for one. We just want to talk strategy in a room where no one's performing." Underneath, 3 signatures already filled in. I stared at it for a moment, not in disbelief, just acknowledgement, then nodded once. "Get them on the calendar." Talia beamed. "Already did." This was becoming a pattern. No decks, no rehearsals, no marketing fireworks, just credibility, earned quietly, in the background, while everyone else tried to go viral. By noon, Marcus forwarded a spreadsheet of our growth curve. He'd added a note. I think we need a bigger whiteboard. The numbers were clean, not explosive, but steady, healthy, intentional. And every new partnership came from the same source, referrals. Not from campaigns, not from cold calls, from people who knew people who remembered what trust used to look like. At 3 p.m., I got another message, short, curious, no subject line. They're asking how you did it, how you stayed quiet and still kept all the leverage. They're rewriting their playbooks, but none of them can agree on the chapter title, Jay. I didn't know who Jay was, didn't matter. They were right. Everyone was asking the same thing, how? But the answer was boring. I hadn't burned anything down, I hadn't hacked the system, I hadn't even shouted. I just waited and wrote the right clauses and honored the right people and didn't flinch when the lights hit me. If you're waiting for a twist, I'm sorry, this isn't a heist. It's a blueprint, the kind you etch slowly, one dotted line at a time. That night, I stayed late again, not because I had to, because I still couldn't quite believe what peace felt like when it didn't come with conditions. I looked out the window. The city glowed like it always does, like it was performing for someone. But I didn't need the spotlight anymore. Just a pen, a plan, and enough quiet to hear my own voice again. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of day that feels like nothing special. Clouds low, coffee lukewarm, a to-do list that felt too long and too shallow all at once. But at 10:06 a.m., the message arrived. No subject line, no sender name, just initials, GH. The first time I'd seen those letters in over 2 weeks. I opened it without hesitation, not because I was curious, because I already knew what it would say. I underestimated you. That's not easy to admit, but I'm doing it now. I thought removing you would quiet the noise. I didn't realize you were the silence holding it all together. That sentence. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask for a meeting. There were no attachments, no offers, no spin. Just a paragraph of surrender disguised as introspection. The board won't say it, but I will. You built something, not just at NovaTrue, but even before. And now, all I can hear is the sound of what you left behind. I hope the silence is treating you better than I did. GH. I closed the message, didn't reply, didn't forward, didn't even mark it unread. Some moments are meant to sit still. Let them echo, let them sting. He finally saw what I'd known all along. The most dangerous thing a woman can be in a corporate system that tries to flatten her isn't loud, it's steady. The rest of the day moved like fog. Calls, meetings, a surprise visit from a potential hire who brought cookies because she didn't know how to show respect without snacks. We hired her by the end of the week, but Greg's message, it lingered, not like a wound, like a mirror. Because if I was honest, I hadn't built NovaTrue just for freedom. I'd built it so no one could ever control the narrative again. That night, I found myself staring at the first notebook I'd ever filled for NovaTrue. The very first page had one sentence, written in a rush, almost as if my hand had known what I didn't. If they silence your voice, sharpen your architecture. It wasn't rage that built this. It was precision. It was refusal to be small. At 8:37 p.m., Marcus sent me a new dashboard visualization. The city was rain-soaked on the morning it all came full circle. Not dramatic storm rain, not cinematic pouring, just that soft, steady kind, the kind that taps against windows like it's reminding you to pause. I was standing by the window of our new office, a top-floor corner suite we hadn't planned to expand into until Q3, but timelines move when trust moves. Talia stepped in holding a slim envelope, no logo, no markings, just my name written in block letters and a small seal pressed into the flap. "You're not going to believe this," she said. I believed it before I even touched it. Inside was an invitation, gold trim, heavy cardstock, one sentence, perfectly centered. The International Board of Strategic Leadership invites Helena Vaughn to deliver the keynote address at the annual Future of Strategy Forum. The forum, the one Wexley used to sponsor. The one where Greg once gave a talk titled Control versus Chaos, Choosing the Right Lever. I remember watching him on that stage, smug and polished, gesturing like a man who thought every finger held a weapon. Now, the same stage was being offered to me. No one had asked for a proposal. No one had asked for slides. Just, we'd like you to speak about silence. And this was the part that made me pause. Because that's what they still didn't fully understand. Silence wasn't a lack of action. It was a choice, a design. The greatest moves I'd ever made weren't loud. They were buried in contract footnotes, drafted at midnight, tested through patience. As I stood there, invitation in hand, my phone buzzed. A short message from Eleanor Green. Let them hear what quiet power actually sounds like. Talia read it over my shoulder and let out a soft whistle. You going? I nodded, but not for the applause, not for the redemption arc, for the blueprint. Because I wanted one person in that crowd to leave with a pen and a new kind of plan. That night, I wrote the first sentence of my speech. Power doesn't always speak. Sometimes it removes itself and waits for the room to notice what it lost. I didn't know what the rest of the speech would be yet, but I knew it would be written the same way Nova True was. From precision, from intention, from stillness. The next morning, I walked into the office to find the team gathered near the main conference table. On it, a cake, lopsided, homemade. The frosting read, "They tried to erase you. Now you're the footnote they have to study." Talia grinned. It was either that or Queen of Strategic Ambush. I laughed, harder than I'd expected to. And for the first time since it all began, since Greg's smirk on stage, since the screen went dark behind me, since I stood alone with that cold award in my hand, I felt it. Not survival, not revenge, joy. Because what we were building, it was working. Not because of press, not because of vengeance. Because we had reintroduced something people had stopped believing in. Integrity that didn't need explanation. Strategy that didn't need performance. Leadership that didn't require the room's permission. I stood back and watched my team, all of them laughing, talking, belonging. And I knew, we hadn't just rewritten the narrative. We'd reclaimed the silence. I arrived at the forum early, not because I was nervous, because I wanted to feel the room before it filled. The chairs arranged in gentle arcs, the spotlight already warming the stage floor. The kind of quiet only found in moments before someone listens. I didn't bring a script, no slides, no slogans, just the pen Eleanor sent and the watch Raymond had returned, worn with intention. People trickled in, slowly at first, then steadily, and then all at once. Faces I hadn't seen in years. People who once avoided eye contact in Wexley's hallways. Clients who now represented seven-figure deals on Nova True's books. Rivals who came not out of support, but curiosity. By the time I took the stage, the room wasn't silent. It was held, not with noise, with expectation. I looked at the crowd, paused, then began. My name is Helena Vaughn. A few nods. One phone already filming. I'm not here to speak about disruption. I'm here to speak about reconstruction. Soft murmurs. They were listening. I'm not going to list my accomplishments. You already Googled me. And if you didn't, it's better